Are you a researcher or an inventor with a great idea and no clue of how to turn it into a business? Check out eCove Capital. They'll get it done. 90% of app ideas fail. If you don't want that to be you, check out Big Kitty Labs. They can help you be successful. Do you run a startup? Chances are your employees are underpaid. Give them the benefit that really matters. 614 Startups Entrepreneurs Brew. Email us today for details. Welcome to the 614 Startups Podcast, the entrepreneur's guide to launching a startup in Columbus, Ohio. 614 Startups Nation. I am so excited. We're back for another episode with my man, Maurice Womack of Simpler. What's up, Maurice?
What's up, man? Let's go with OASIS. I'm trying to make the transition to OASIS.
Okay, see, I didn't know we were making the transition.
Man. I mean, we're going full speed with the OASIS. I mean, we still do a lot here locally, and we'll get to that, but we really are like transforming into OASIS now, man, full time almost. So.
Okay, well then let's start with that. Why the transition from Simpler to OASIS?
It's more of an evolution, right? So I think of it as an evolution. So how do we reach more kids, right? So kind of what we do with the STEAM, and I guess we'll get into that here, is one of our missions is what we call to eradicate STEM deserts, right? So similar to a food desert. But STEM, right, where people don't have access to quality STEM learning experiences, which affects them from an educational standpoint, right? So you know, as an engineer, a technical problem solver is always, well, how can I reach more people? How can I use technology to really accomplish our mission? And that's kind of where OASIS was born from that. Okay, terrific. And it's great when the brand kind of explain what it does. Yeah,
so the simpler idea, you would have to do a little more explaining.
Yeah, and my wife, she gives me hell about that a lot. You know, that the simpler, you could read Simpler, but you wouldn't know what we did from it. And it was, I guess, not really connected to our mission, right? So the OASIS I'm an acronym guy. So OASIS is an acronym, is opening access to STEAM in informal settings. So, but it works out that it's also about eradicating STEM deserts as well, and kind of creating this oasis of resources and information around STEM.
I love it. Now, for people who don't know who you are, what's your personal background? And we'll get into then the business background right after that.
So I'm originally from Youngstown, Ohio. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. So I've worked at Battelle, currently still work at the Department of Defense. So, you know, in a civilian capacity. So been teaching, engineering. That's kind of what kind of rolled us into, the Simpler / OASIS. But I grew up, always wanted to be an engineer. Right. So, and I guess, my father kind of recognized some aptitudes that I had when I was young. And it was always centered around the characters and the stories that I was familiar with. Right. So, like, for instance, Transformers. I was a big Transformers fan growing up, right? Star Wars, Star Trek. But within those stories is technology is embedded within those stories, right? Even though Star Wars is fantasy, they're flying around in spaceships, right? They're using light swords that can cut through anything, right? So even though it was science fiction, it was some truth to it. And it really was one of those things that kind of propelled me to want to be a creator, right? A maker of things, right? And so those aspirational technologies that in those movies and in those stories and characters were always like a driver for me to want to become an engineer. And that's kind of what led me down that path.
You know what, though, as you were telling that story about you having that early interest because of things like Transformers and Star Wars, when I was coming up, and I'm not that old, I was born in 1981. It was still uncool to be a nerd.
Absolutely.
And those passions for science fiction and those passions for technology often express themselves in ways that, from the outside looking in, that kid would be perceived to be a nerd. I think one of the issues that we have to deal with is access, right? Just availability.
Absolutely.
But I think the other issue we have to deal with is perceptions of people. Kids, not only, we are super influenced by our peers. So even if all this technology is in my face, if I feel like within my peer group embracing those passions of mine make me an outcast, I'm less likely to do so. Did you have to deal with any of those things coming up?
Yeah.
And if there's a kid or a parent with a kid dealing with that right now, what are some of the personal experiences you can share on that?
Yeah. For me, if you know anything about Youngstown, it's very it's hood, if you for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
So especially inner city Youngstown. So I grew up in that, and I was. I wouldn't say I was picked on, but I was identified as like a nerdy type, right? So I did pretty well in school, was in gifted classes, things of that nature. But, I was able to kind of walk that line a little bit, right? So, my sister, from a popularity standpoint, she was on the opposite end of the spectrum. So she was popular, and I guess it affected me a little bit, for parents that are kind of dealing with that, I would say, find others who are like you, especially nowadays, man. I mean, back then we didn't have access to social media or online communities where you can connect with people who aren't maybe geographically close to you. But nowadays, I mean, to connect with like-minded people, individuals, families, kids is very easy, so I would definitely say, as far as a suggestion to seek out other like-minded people and kids. And that's kind of why we're doing what we're doing, right? To create a beacon, if you will, for those who are looking for things for their children to do that maybe their peers aren't necessarily attracted to, but want to find something that they see in their kid and want to kind of nurture that. And so I definitely, and again, that's part of our mission, right? How do we create these spaces, lack of a better term, safe spaces where you can come and nerd out, right? And not be looked down upon or picked on, right? So plus I think, I think technology is becoming cool, right? And I think the startup movement in Silicon Valley and here in Columbus now is kind of, I guess, feeding that. And so I think times are changing. I think parents, if nobody else, recognize that children with technology skills, engineering, critical thinking skills will be positioned for success in the future. And so a lot of parents are looking for these exposures for their children. And we want to be there to kind of welcome them in, if you will.
I love it. And so you're building this career for yourself. You go to school, you graduate. Like you said, you're working for some pretty large, you were working for a pretty large a private company, and then you transitioned into working as a civilian in a governmental agency. What prompts you to start what was then Simpler and is
Sure.
now OASIS?
So I was, my wife, it's funny, my wife was, she had quit her job as a teacher in Columbus Public School to go back and get her PhD at Ohio State. And so I was really looking for a part-time job, right? Because you go from 2 incomes to 1. And we had just had our first child, and it was like, okay, I got to find something that, but I didn't want to, go to the corner and work at the local McDonald's. I had skills, I had experience. And so found a job at Columbus State teaching engineering, right? So, and that's kind of where some of our lessons were first born. The students who would come in, they weren't passionate about engineering, right? They were there because somebody told them engineers were paid well, right? And so the problem
is
is
kind of like what happened in nursing.
Exactly.
Be a nurse.
Yeah.
There's a nursing shortage. There's an engineer shortage. There's a software development shortage. So I definitely know that story.
Yeah. So there's a demand, and people are pushing them toward those careers. Problem is when you reach calc or you reach kinematics, or you get into a class where it requires a lot of mental effort and strain, typically people will just drop out or switch majors, right, and say it's not worth it, right? And so so for me, because I kind of persevered through a lot of that, it was like I knew I wanted to be an engineer. I knew that nobody was going to stop me. And so, and that, again, upon reflection, came from essentially my upbringing, right? This idea of connecting what I call science fiction and comic book characters and stories to engineering and technology, right? Especially nowadays with the movies that the kids are exposed to, right? Like Iron Man, that was one of the lessons I use on the college level, right? So we're connecting how Tony Stark develops his Iron Man suit, the Mark I prototype, to the engineering design process, right? Or if we're building a robot, we're not building a generic robot. We're building an R2D2 or a Wally, right? So, and the college students loved it, right? And so that kind of rolled into, all right, let's try to solve this problem of passion, right, around engineering and technical work and careers. At that time, STEM wasn't as big as it was now, where, you know, everybody assumes that their children are going to go into STEM fields or are pushing them towards that. And so we saw an opportunity there to really reach a lot of youth in STEM. And so we started with high school students and then felt that we really needed to really go down even further. And so that's kind of where we focus on K through 8.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, for the long time in our education system, it was theoretical first, master the theoretical, then you could move on to application. I think what is interesting about your approach and what you're doing over at OASIS, because of your experience working part-time at Columbus State, knowing that a lot of these students may have come up, even though they had made it to college level studies, that they had come up through STEM deserts, meaning a lot of them would have come up through the Columbus public school system where maybe they didn't have access, and that would have been their first introduction.
Sure. Even rural areas.
Correct. And Columbus State is like probably one of the largest universities in Ohio, or 2-year programs in Ohio, or maybe one of the top 10 in the country at this point. They're building out their campus to meet the demand as well. So you recognize this in the need for, you know, kind of combining two into one. Learn the theoretical alongside the applicable, because that makes the theoretical more interesting.
Absolutely.
It makes you be able to sustain the mental effort necessary to get through it. And so as you're working at the university, what is the process like going from, okay, I have this idea, to actually launching OASIS?
So, you know, kind of having an entrepreneurial spirit, you know, I had tried some startup ideas in the past, and so I'm always looking for opportunities, right? So it was like, okay, so how do we teach kids essentially STEM, right? Who do we reach out to? And because we lived in Gahanna, we currently live in Gahanna, it was like, okay, well, let's start with the superintendent, right? So I actually tweeted him from our account and tagged some nice pictures, and he was like, okay, let's set a meeting, you know, so he liked that. And so we set a meeting, went into the meeting, essentially blew his mind with what we were doing for kids, the whole connecting it to science fiction and comic book characters and stories. And he essentially gave us space in Clark Hall there in Gahanna for free. And they pretty much advertised the program. At that point, it was still high school students, and sold out, right? 20 students, right? For 8 weeks, sold out. And that's kind of where we kind of knew we had something. And it really was born out of that. And that's when we like, okay, well, let's shift gears a little bit and go to a younger demographic, and then also try to make inroads within the city of Columbus, right? Kind of how do we give back, right? And really expose those who traditionally don't have access, because that initial course that we had in Gahanna was $300 for 8 weeks. So if you can imagine, if you're living in Columbus proper, right, that's a half a rent payment right there, right? And so we kind of tried to solve some problems around that, you know, again, just always thinking, how can we solve some problems, right? And so because we're for profit, what we did is we actually started to partner with nonprofits, and then go after grant monies that would pay for us to come out, right? And so that's where over 3 years we got close to $180,000 in grant monies that allowed for us to go out to after school programs in the city of Columbus. So from Battelle, Honda R&D, AEP Ohio. So shout out to those organizations for really being able to support that need in Columbus.
So just thinking from a purely for-profit standpoint, you know, looking for product market fit, you have a hit on your hands. High school students, suburbia.
Yep. Sells
out. The city of Gahanna is behind it. They give you free property space. They get it. Are you tempted to stay in Gahanna, one, and just take, for lack of a better word, the easy money, right? People who can afford it and they identify the need. There's no objection. There's not very much selling. We have a classroom here. It's an 8-week program. It's $300. We deliver good value.
Sure.
20 parents every 8 weeks.
Yeah.
20 parents every 8 weeks. Expand to Pickerington, expand to, Upper Arlington, expand to Hilliard, expand to Dublin. That's the easy money.
Yeah.
Were you ever tempted to just take that, or was the plan always to go from that to what you're doing now?
Yeah, I was tempted. Yeah. And honestly, we were trying to do both in parallel, right? So we were doing what we were doing in Columbus with nonprofit organizations, and we were really trying to build a retail location as well, which you've been to in Gahanna, right? And so, but as our social enterprise started to really take off, we realized we had to kind of consolidate our resources and move in one direction with OASIS. And so, yeah, absolutely tempted to do that. But the more, we were in these spaces and the more that you could kind of see the smile and the light bulb on the kids' faces after going through your program and just how impactful it was, it really became a no-brainer at that point, right? So, because we realized how important it is to really, expose youth to what we're doing, with the whole goal that, whether they decide to pursue a STEM career or not, that they are equipped with skills that will allow them to really be successful in any profession. So,
so you pivot to helping kids who are younger, but then who may not have the resources, their parents may not, to actually pay for the course, and so you're getting grant writing. In terms of the value proposition, I feel like when you explained it to Gahanna, they understood. They gave you a space. The space is free. Just go there, do it.
Yeah.
Did you have a similar reception, meaning the folks that you wanted to serve and maybe didn't have the resources to serve, were they 100% on board? Meaning, has this idea that STEM is absolutely necessary and we need to but we need to expose kids to it as early as possible? Is it now a no-brainer to the point where when you approach a new school system, no matter who they are, where they are, they accept it and they're ready to support you?
I wouldn't say that. We talk about this idea of product market fit. Initially, we thought our customer was the after school program, right? But we found here recently in the last few months that it's actually school districts, right? Because they have teachers, professionals who are able to just take a step back. So we've kind of evolved from the delivering classes in the physical space to OASIS is what we call hands-on video-led learning, right? So the way that works is that you order a class or course, and then you get access to the course content, but then we also ship the materials that you would need to deliver that class to your location. So now we're not limited geographically. So we're actually in talks with a charter school consortium in Los Angeles now. They're interested in piloting it. And so you can kind of see how the evolution of now we're able to reach anybody anywhere, right? So, but we wanted to maintain the hands-on piece of it. And so that's kind of why we ship the materials, right? So it's not one-to-one, a child sits down and looks at the videos. They're watching videos as a class. And I'm instructing the coach, we call them coaches, the adult in the class that's in the physical space, to pass out materials that are downloadable, to group the kids, then to do an activity and then play the next video. So we're really making full up lessons from zero to finish around STEM, right? So we make it as turnkey as possible. So you don't need to be a content expert. You just really need to be able to follow directions and pass out materials, group kids and so forth, right? And so that's kind of, so as far as the value proposition, right? So I think these organizations were like, absolutely, we do want STEM, our kids need it. They see that piece of it. A problem is how do you afford it for, a lot of after school programs are limited in terms of funding and budget. And so, and again, that's where this idea of a STEM desert arises from, right? I think people understand they need it, just like people understand they need nutritional food, right? Organic, healthy vegetables and fruits that you can have access to. The problem is those items are usually cost more money, right? And that's typically how these deserts arise, right? And so what we're doing with OASIS is trying to bring down the cost per student, right? Using technology. So now you can utilize the technology is you can replay the videos, the materials are reusable, and so you can start to now deliver it to larger groups of kids, so the cost per student comes down. And that's kind of how we're solving that problem of cost, right? And funding.
Yeah. And let's say there's a head of a school district listening, there's a teacher who teaches in a class and they want to integrate STEM into that class. How does your packaging work? Meaning, like when you approach a school district, what do they get? And then if they don't have necessarily maybe the funding, how do you help them secure that funding? Is that all part of what OASIS does?
Not necessarily. So we do work with another provider who kind of identifies STEM grants that are available if that's something that you would need. We're trying to make it cost effective enough that you can buy it and deliver it to, if you got 100 kids, you pay this one price, you get these materials, you get access to the course.
So let me stop you right there, because now if you just listen to what you hear in the media, or just because I'm not in the education space, I don't really understand. There's this idea that you're teaching to the test. And so most of the investments, based on what I understand, are made in order for kids to pass the test, because that's how the school is ranked. And the higher you rank, the more money you get, more kids want to go to your school. So when you're talking to a district about taking some money away from that pile where they're actually being scored, although you're bringing the cost down, is it all coming from the same pile of money, and now they have to see it as a strategic part of their overall objective in order to make that investment? Is that really what the key is, helping the district understand that?
And I think, if you're a progressive leader, I think there's research that shows that, you can't just teach to the test, right? I mean, you pass the test, or you maybe can increase some measurements here and there, but ultimately you're really designing a system to create children who are in a robotic setting, right? And what happens is that zaps a child's intrinsic desire to want to learn, right? And so that's kind of another way that we're different, right? So we really incorporate the play aspect, right? So especially because we're addressing kids in the K-8 band, right? So we have to make it engaging and fun and exciting, right? And so that's why we focus on emerging technologies, right? Drone technology, 3D printing, artificial intelligence. These are the topics that kids are somewhat familiar with and definitely curious about, right? And maybe never would have thought they'd have an opportunity to interact with. And so I think educators, at least on an administrative level and definitely in the classroom, understand. But I mean, this is something that they have to do, right? It's one of those things. But I think in the heart of any great educator, they understand the need for children to learn and to be intrinsically motivated to want to learn, right? And so I think our product solves kind of both of those things. So they are standards aligned, which is a big term in education, right? Is it developmentally appropriate, right? And so that's something that we do incorporate. It is all of our project labs are standards aligned. But they also have a big fun factor, if you will, right? So our motto is learn, build, play when it comes to the learning, right? So there's the learning piece on the front end. We're doing some hands-on with the building, and then there's always a play aspect tacked on to the back, whether that's a competition or something of that nature to really cap it off.
And what I like about Oasis's business model, because you're serving the kids, you're serving the school districts, but like you said, you had supporters as well, so corporate supporters that you shouted out. One of the things that I like about how you develop curriculum is that it's not exclusive to things like movies or technologies that kids might love. You're also looking at your funders. Let's say, somebody supporting you like Honda. Right. How can we create a hybrid vehicle curriculum where that is integrated and it could be sponsored by Honda?
Absolutely.
If you have a large company CEO, director of research and development, and they're looking for ways to fund innovation, let's talk a bit about how you use those ways of developing curriculum as well.
It's course sponsorship, right? So an organization could say, hey, we want you to focus on this technology that we're kind of related to or have it, and we want to get more kids exposed to it. Can you develop a course using the OASIS platform that, that's also fun and engaging and that we can sponsor so that maybe either the course price is brought down a little bit so it makes it a little bit more affordable, or maybe to zero it out so that it's given away for free to organizations who are interested, right? So, and a lot of that for corporations who are interested in that, again, they're interested in getting more kids exposed, right? And making sure that kids are prepared because there's an investment as far as future workforce is concerned for them, right? So how do we get more youth exposed so that we have a workforce that will be prepared to work for us and be able to do what we need them to do in the future, right? So there's always questions in the education spaces whether or not we're preparing children for the economy of the future, right? And so that's one of the things that we want to focus on. And so any organization that is committed to really exposing more youth to STEM and STEAM definitely will be interested in something like that.
Terrific. Now, long term, what do you want your impact to be? Your personal impact and the impact of OASIS.
Sure.
What would you like that to be?
Long term, so STEM is kind of where we're focused now, right? But I do have a larger vision of where I want to go with OASIS in this style of learning, right? Online video led learning. So ultimately, I do have big plans for changing the educational landscape around how we're delivering content, what we're delivering, right? And we can talk about that offline, but there's definitely a bigger vision for OASIS outside and beyond just STEM, right? From an education standpoint, right? And technology standpoint. What was the other question?
So your personal impact is about transforming
Sure.
how STEM education is
Absolutely.
delivered. And then for OASIS in particular,
Yeah.
I think that's in line with what you're saying now.
And then personally, I do want to be a role model for youth, right? I'm not lost on the fact that I'm an African-American male in a space that traditionally doesn't have too many of us, right? So, for me, I recognize the importance of role models and aspirational figures, right? So, for instance, I always bring this up. I was a big Star Trek fan again, right? So, Geordie LaForge, LeVar Burton. I don't know if you remember LeVar Burton. He played Geordie LaForge on Star Trek: The Next Generation. He was the one, if you don't remember, he had the visor, right? Because he was blind, he used the visor, and he was always one of my favorite characters. He's African American chief of engineering on Starship Enterprise, right? And so that was very impactful for me. So I understand that kids need role models, right? So I want to be a role model for kids who aspire to be engineers, to be technical in some way, to be creators. And so, I kind of had this persona, this Mr. Mo persona, right? So trying to build out really and inspire youth to look to me potentially to as an inspiration, right, on what they could be from a creator standpoint. So.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Maurice. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I close every episode with my one takeaway. Ever since I met you, man, you're a Mr. I'll find a way to get it done. Hey, can you make me a list of STEM toys? I got you. Hey, if the district can't pay for it, I got a vendor that can help them with that. If you're an entrepreneur out there, man, you could take a page out of Maurice's book. No matter what the issue is, no matter what you throw at him, he is Mr. Get It Done. Thank you so much to 614 Startups Nation for joining us again on another episode. Peace. Thank you so much for joining us on the 614 Startups podcast. My name is Elio Harmon. Episodes of the podcast roll out every week at www.614startups.com and on iTunes. Don't forget, follow us on IG and Facebook at 614 Startups. Peace.